This is Limelight America. Here's your host, Michael Drew Shaw.
Thank you, Lynette, and welcome to Limelight America, where we present one-on-one personal conversations with interesting people from all walks of life. These up-close encounters with people of the fascinating and inspiring kind include business, entertainment, sports, and artistic entrepreneurs, scholars, role models, and philanthropists who impact the quality of life for us all.
A grocer with no financial experience lays the foundation for the world's largest bank. A bright young telegraph operator paves the way for the modern mass media. A former cabaret singer sparks a revolution that will influence every designer on the planet. These are just a few of the entrepreneurs who revolutionized the 20th century.
The 20th century marked an era of unprecedented progress, growth, and ingenuity. In this entertaining and intriguing collection of profiles, you'll meet groundbreaking entrepreneurs who fueled this explosion of achievement and shaped our modern world. From the turn-of-the-century capitalists who ushered in the industrial age, to the mass-market moguls who molded pop culture, to the whiz kids who launched the world into cyberspace, you are about to embark on a lively, revealing, and often astonishing chronicle of the lives and accomplishments of some of the most influential entrepreneurs of the past 100 years.
Nobody can be a success if they don't love their work. David Sarnoff.
David Sarnoff wasn't a scientist, engineer, or inventor. Yet he, more than any other individual, was the driving force behind the development of the electronic mass media in the United States. Truly ahead of his time, Sarnoff's vision and ambition fueled some of the greatest technological achievements of the 20th century. His stubborn pursuit of technology turned his employer, Radio Corporation of America, RCA, into a powerhouse in less than a decade. Along the way, he managed to spawn one of America's top 3 television networks. Sarnoff's story is a classic American rags-to-riches tale. Born in Russia in 1891, the young boy and his family traveled steerage to America when he was 9. Knowing no English, Sarnoff entered school but also helped support his family by running errands for a local butcher, selling and delivering newspapers, and singing at the synagogue. When Sarnoff was 15, his father became very sick from tuberculosis, so Sarnoff was forced to quit school and take on the full burden of supporting his family. He bought a telegraph key, taught himself Morse code, and applied for a job at Marconi Wireless Telegraph Company of America. Although he hoped to be hired as a telegraph operator, he accepted the only job available, which was office boy. Sarnoff made the most of the opportunity, learning as much as he could about his employer's company by pursuing the correspondence and memos it was his job to deliver. He also attached himself to any company executive who could further his career. His efforts quickly paid off. Within 2 years, he became a full-fledged wireless operator, and by 1911, he was managing the 5-kilowatt Marconi station on top of the Wanamaker department store in New York City. In 1915, he submitted a memo outlining an idea for what he called a radio music box. At the time, radio was mainly used in shipping and by amateur wireless enthusiasts. But Sarnoff boasted that his device would make radio a household utility, like the phonograph. The idea, he wrote, is to bring music into the house by wireless. Marconi management wrote off the concept as a commercial folly. After World War I in 1919, General Electric formed RCA to absorb Marconi's U.S. assets, which included Sarnoff. Figuring the new management might see things his way, Sarnoff again submitted his radio music box idea. RCA execs were intrigued, but pointed out that in order to sell radios, they had to have programming. But Sarnoff had already conquered that problem. He proposed that RCA, in conjunction with GE and its partners, would produce the radio and underwrite programming at the same time. To prove his idea would work, on July 2, 1922, Sarnoff broadcast the Jack Dempsey prize fight. Few people owned radio receivers in those days, so Sarnoff arranged to have receivers connected to large amplifiers that were strategically placed in theaters and auditoriums throughout the eastern states. The fight was a knockout for both Dempsey and Sarnoff, the former in the fourth round, the latter when reports of the radio audience being some 500,000 people poured in. Within 3 years, the radio music box, now called the Radiola, and priced at a hefty $75, was a success, with sales of $83.5 million. Sarnoff's career took off. Now his next bright idea. RCA could increase its sales of radios by stringing together hundreds of stations from coast to coast, creating a national broadcasting network. Based on this plan, in 1926, as general manager of RCA, Sarnoff formed the National Broadcasting Company as a subsidiary of RCA. With radio clearly a success, Sarnoff turned his attention to another pet project in which he saw tremendous potential: television. He set up a special NBC station called B2XBS to experiment with the new medium. At the World's Fair in April of 1939, Sarnoff conducted the first public television broadcast. Speaking from the RCA Pavilion on the fair's Avenue of Progress, Sarnoff told viewers, "It is with a feeling of humbleness that I come to this moment of announcing the birth of a new art so important in its implication that it is bound to affect all society." Television would have arrived faster if it weren't for the intervention of World War II, during which Sarnoff served as a consultant for General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Upon his return to civilian life, Sarnoff threw himself into making his dream of commercial television a reality. The new medium seemed risky and expensive at the time, but just as Sarnoff had predicted, the post-war TV market boomed, and RCA recouped its $50 million investment in research in just 3 years. Sarnoff then became obsessed with color television, gambling millions of dollars on its success and nearly losing. The problem with color TV lay in creating a set that was compatible, able to receive both black and white and color images. In 1950, the Federal Communications Commission approved a non-compatible system developed by NBC's top rival, the Columbia Broadcasting System, but reversed its decision 3 years later when NBC came up with a compatible system. Sarnoff had spent $150 million to come out ahead, but the investment proved to be worthwhile. Color television would be Sarnoff's last and perhaps his greatest accomplishment. In the summer of 1968, he became ill with a mastoid infection and never fully recovered. In 1970, he retired as chairman of RCA, and he died a year later. At the time of his death, RCA was grossing more than $3 billion annually and had 64 manufacturing plants in the United States and abroad. During his 41-year tenure as head of RCA, Sarnoff had turned the fledgling company into a corporate titan. But his real genius lay in his ability to see further into the future than his contemporaries and, through hard work and determination, bring that future into reality. It was Sarnoff who was primarily responsible for both radio and television and the creation of a truly global village. And a footnote on Sarnoff: as a member of General Dwight D. Eisenhower's staff during World War II, he spearheaded many of the communications advances that aided the Allies in defeating the Axis forces. Under Sarnoff's direction, RCA developed and produced airborne and shipborne missiles guided by TV, as well as many other types of equipment, including electronic navigation systems. Sarnoff himself coordinated D-Day communications and was later instrumental in restoring communication systems in France.
You're listening to Limelight America with Michael Drew Shaw.
One of our future guests on Limelight America will be Tom Feldenstein, who has counseled some of the world's best-known retailers, e-stores, hotels, and restaurants, including Ben & Jerry's, Texaco, and Brunswick, Hyatt Hotel and Resorts, Subway, and Morton's. He's written 9 books and shared his insight and expertise on CNN's Larry King Live, The David Letterman Show, Lou Dobbs' Moneyline, and numerous other television and radio programs nationwide. Tom's been extensively quoted and has been the subject of feature articles in countless newspaper and publications, including the Wall Street Journal, U.S. News and World Report, USA Today, the Washington Post, and Entrepreneur magazine. Tom was the first recipient of the Visionary Award presented by the Council of International Restaurant Brokers. Tom is CEO of Tom Feltenstein's Power Marketing Academy.
I'm Jonathan Winters, and I want to say, okay, are you ready? You have a level here, and you're all set.
The real Jonathan Winters was born in Dayton on November 11th, 1925. After attending public school in Springfield, Ohio, he joined the Marine Corps at the age of 17. He served 2.5 years in the South Pacific, then returned to Ohio and attended Kenyon College. His interest in art led him to Dayton Art Institute, where he studied for over 2 years, then met the girl he would eventually marry, Eileen. Eileen encouraged Jonathan to enter a local talent contest in Dayton, Ohio, which he did. He won a wristwatch, but the performance led him to a job as an early morning disc jockey on radio station WING in Dayton. That was in 1946. In 1953, Jonathan Winters headed for New York for the big time with $56 in his pocket. Join me for the Jonathan Winters story.
You're listening to Limelight America.
Henry Ford never let a wrong turn stop him. His first venture failed miserably, at least for him. He was forced out of his own company by two partners who went on to build another model called Cadillac. 7 years later, a dozen investors put up $2,500 each, and the Ford Motor Company was born. That $2,500 turned into $30 million by 1910. Henry Ford had other failures, including unsuccessful bids for the Senate and the presidency, and then there was the Edsel. But that wasn't his fault. If you have an idea, don't let setbacks or indecision get in your way. Like Yogi Berra once said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. In 1923, a small group of the world's wealthiest and loneliest men gathered at the Edgewater Beach Hotel in Chicago. At the time, they collectively had more money than the U.S. Treasury. Listen to what eventually happened to them. Charles Schwab, head of America's largest steel company, died broke. So did wheat speculator Arthur Cutten. Richard Whitney, president of the New York Stock Exchange, died in prison. Jess Livermore, Leon Fraser, and Ivar Kruger, all Wall Street barons, committed suicide. The moral? Don't confuse wealth with happiness. Always make things more enduring than money your first priority. Mavericks, rebels, innovators and inventors, trailblazers and pioneers. The 20th century marked an era of unprecedented progress, growth, and ingenuity. In the entertaining and intriguing collection of profiles titled Radicals and Visionaries, we're introducing you to groundbreaking entrepreneurs who fueled the explosion of achievement and shaped our modern world. Radicals and Visionaries reveals the complete stories of both the legendary masters of enterprise and the unsung entrepreneurial heroes.
You don't have to be a genius or a visionary or even a college graduate to be successful. You just need a framework and a dream. Michael Dell.
Michael Dell wasn't the only young entrepreneur to ride the computer boom of the late 1980s and early 1990s from rags to riches. But unlike some of his ill-fated peers who lost control of their creations as they grew, Dell has managed to hold on to the reins of his maverick venture and achieve the unique distinction of being the computer industry's longest tenured CEO. Following the simple idea that by selling customized personal computer systems directly to customers, he could best understand their needs and provide the most effective computing solutions to meet those needs, Dell made Dell Computer Corporation the world's leading direct computer systems company. Dell's parents wanted him to be a doctor, But by the time he was in junior high, he was hooked on computers. While most of his classmates were tinkering under the hoods of old cars, Dell loved to tinker with his Apple computer. To please his parents, Dell enrolled as a pre-med student at the University of Texas in 1983, but by then his only real interest was in computers. During his first semester, Dell spent his spare time buying up outmoded PCs from local retailers and then upgrading and selling them from his dorm room. He was so successful that one day his roommate piled his ever-growing inventory up against the door of the room. Dell took this as a sign it was time to move his burgeoning business off campus. His parents were furious when he told them he wanted to drop out of college. So, to appease them, Dell agreed to go back to school if the summer's sales proved disappointing. In his first month in business, Dell sold some $180,000 worth of PCs. He never returned for his sophomore year. While looking for ways to expand his fledgling startup, Dell concluded computers would soon become a commodity. And with commodities, what matters most is price and delivery. Dell saw that the quickest way to achieve both goals was to cut out the middleman. He realized that he could buy components and assemble the whole PC himself more cheaply. Then he could sell each machine over the phone directly to customers at a 15% discount to established brands. This technique, which came to be known as the direct model of selling, would revolutionize the industry and make Dell a multi-billionaire in the process. The 19-year-old Dell dubbed his venture PCs Limited, and the Austin-based company soon became one of the fastest-growing enterprises in the country. Rather than flooding the market with hundreds of thousands of plain brown wrapper computers, the company would focus on what it did best, creating customized machines to order. The strategy worked. During its first year in operation, PCs Limited pulled in more than $6 million in sales, and Dell quickly gained a reputation as a boy wonder. To cash in on his growing fame, he changed the company's name to Dell Computer Corporation in 1987. Sales continued to soar, topping $159 million by the end of 1988. That same year, Dell made an initial public offering which raised $30 million, about $18 million of which went directly into Dell's pocket. For many startup entrepreneurs, that would have been a pinnacle, signaling it was time to move on to the next promising adventure. But in Dell's mind, he was just getting started. He now set his sights on overtaking industry leader IBM. In 1992, Dell set a goal of passing the $1.5 billion mark by the end of the year. Always the overachiever, Dell met his goal and then some as sales rocketed to $2 billion. But in the midst of this success, there were storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The company was growing at a pace that was too fast for the young entrepreneur to handle. Stock prices had plummeted from $49 in January of '93 to a mere $16 by July. Dell's CFO resigned, leaving a management void. And worst of all, Dell had scrapped all its new lines of notebook computers because of poor production and was forced to sit on the sidelines of the fastest growing segment of the PC market for more than 12 months. Dell realized he needed to do something, and do it quickly. His solution was to seek out older, more experienced managers to help him regain control of his 9-year-old juggernaut. First, he brought in Mort Topfer, a seasoned executive from Motorola, to handle day-to-day operations. Next, he tapped the talents of Kevin Rollins, an organizational expert from Bain & Company, to run the American operations. And perhaps his most important coup, Dell stole Apple's PowerBook designer. Within 12 months, the listing company was righted, and the following year, profits climbed to $149 million. But even with this amazing turnaround, Dell knew his company's place in the increasingly competitive PC industry was in no way guaranteed. To ensure continued success, Dell and his top executives made a pair of controversial strategic decisions. First, instead of initiating a price war in pursuit of greater sales units, Dell chose to focus on high-margin business customers. Second, the company opted to rely exclusively on direct marketing rather than retail. Industry pundits questioned the second move, pointing out that by selling direct, Dell was slighting the then sizzling home PC market. But Dell knew better. Dell discovered he could not compete with Compaq's strong brand name and Packard Bell's cutthroat pricing. Selling through retail stores was definitely out. But Dell wasn't about to give up the lucrative consumer market. Instead, he decided to sell fully customized PCs via phone, fax, and direct sales to more sophisticated, second-time home computer buyers. Once again, Dell proved his critics wrong. The company's new approach had sales topping $5.5 billion by the end of 1996. But Dell had yet another ace up his sleeve. In July of '96, he launched one of the first direct sale computer websites, and in just 2 months was averaging internet sales in excess of $2 million a day, a number that would rise to $6 million a day by 1998. The combination of selling direct via phone and internet pushed Dell sales to $7.7 billion by February of 1997. Until this time, industry experts and Dell's three main rivals, Compaq, IBM, and Hewlett-Packard, were convinced that direct sales would only gain Dell a niche market. But with the help of some clever advertising, like "Dude, you're getting a Dell," which was the popular rallying cry of one ad's cheerfully hip teenager, Dell ultimately evolved into a mainstream name, even though it still relies on direct selling as its preferred mode of retailing. And sales kept climbing. 2001 brought $8 billion in revenue. And by the first quarter of 2005, Dell was on track to see sales of $13.4 billion. Other companies finally did adopt direct selling, but they were too late to stop Dell's growth. Defying expectations, Dell has morphed itself into the world's largest personal computer maker. Although Michael Dell has been vilified by some American critics for outsourcing, in 2005, Dell added a third call center in India that staffed 1,500 people. Overall, he seems to have more enthusiasts than not. In a recent Inc. magazine survey, Dell even topped Bill Gates in a list of most admired entrepreneurs. Michael Dell is also a philanthropist. In 2006, the University of Texas at Austin announced a $50 million grant from the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation to bring excellence in children's health and education to Austin. The grant will enable the construction of 3 new facilities at that university. To learn more about Michael Dell and other entrepreneurs, go to entrepreneurpress.com. This is Limelight America. We'll be right back. Did you hear the one about the law school graduate on his way to a legal career? He was walking down the street and turned into a sporting goods store. Well, that's a rough version of an old joke, but it's a true story. The graduate's name? Ed Stack, now chairman of Dick's Clothing and Sporting Goods. It all began in the early 80s when his family convinced him to take over 2 small family-owned stores in Binghamton, New York. Presiding from the boardroom, not the courtroom, Ed Stack has built Dick's into one of the largest sporting good retailers in the world. Founded in 1948 as a bait and tackle store, Dick's now employs over 1,000 people in western Pennsylvania alone. Andrew Carnegie's life was a true rags-to-riches story. Born to a poor Scottish family that immigrated to the United States, Carnegie became a powerful businessman and a leading force in American steel. Carnegie believed that the wealthy had an obligation to give back to society. In 1902, he founded the Carnegie Institution to fund scientific research, and he established a pension fund for teachers with a $10 million donation. That's the equivalent of $250 million in today's money. Ever play that game where you slide a quarter across the table and get a point if it hangs over the edge without falling off? Well, that pastime, born out of boredom, is essentially the same story as that of Matt Balick and Justin Lewis from Highland Park, Illinois, who took their game to market. These 2 11-year-olds turned those little plastic thingamabobs that come in the middle of a pizza to keep the top of the box from smooshing down into the cheese into flippets, colorful tiddlywink-type toys that fly through the air when you press down on the top. 2 Bored Boys is a real company and proof that you can be an entrepreneur no matter how old you are. When Mattel co-founder Ruth Handler first proposed that the company make a grown-up doll, the marketing staff at Mattel balked at the idea. Little girls like playing with baby dolls, they proclaimed, and they were certain that adult women wouldn't want their children to have a doll with breasts. But the budding business dynamo wasn't one to give up easily. It took her nearly 3 years, but Handler finally convinced the company to make the doll. It was probably the best decision they ever made. Barbie, as Ruth would name the 11.5-inch doll, was an instant hit, not only making Mattel an undisputed leader in toy manufacturing, but also creating a $1.9 billion per year industry. The company that would eventually become one of the world's leading toy manufacturers began rather inauspiciously in a garage in El Segundo, California. The original founders, Harold Matson and Elliot Handler, dubbed the venture Mattel, creating the name by combining the letters of their first and last names. Mattel's first product was picture frames, but Elliot developed a side business making dollhouse furniture from picture frame scraps. Believing the company was doomed to fail, Matson sold out to his partner, and Handler's wife, Ruth, joined him as co-owner. Encouraged by the success of their doll furniture, the Handlers switched the company's emphasis to toys and began making a line of musical products, including a child-sized ukulele and a patented hand-crank music box, which generated much of the company's revenue in the 50s and 60s. The company did reasonably well, but was far from an industry powerhouse. It was in 1956 that Ruth Handler hit upon the ingenious idea that would rocket Mattel to the forefront of the toy industry and fascinate 4 generations of young girls. Handler got the inspiration for the Barbie doll while watching her young daughter, Barbara, and her friends playing with paper dolls. The girls liked to play adult or teenage make-believe with the dolls, imagining them as college students, cheerleaders, and adults with careers. It dawned on Handler that make-believe and pretending about the future are important parts of growing up. In researching the market, she discovered a void and became determined to fill the niche with a 3D doll. Mattel designers had their doubts, going so far as to say that making such a doll was impossible. While vacationing in Europe, Handler discovered a German doll named Lili. She bought 3 dolls and sent Mattel designers to Japan, telling them to find a manufacturer. Handler's vision for the doll was that she be the ideal woman. According to legend, Barbie's face and figure were created from a combination of the best features of the day's most popular stars. In 1999, at a gala event celebrating Barbie's 40th birthday, Handler was asked if she was surprised by Barbie's tremendous success. "I always thought Barbie was very, very basic," she replied. "She was as basic a toy for play as was possible to have, and I had faith that she would be a great toy. But I never thought that any toy could ever last this long or grow this big." After a personal victory over breast cancer in the mid-1970s, Ruth Handler retired from Mattel. She went on to use her experience and expertise to start Ruthven Corporation, which is dedicated to the development and manufacturing of breast prostheses called Nearly Me. By meeting with department store buyers, promoting the products herself across the country, and talking candidly with other breast cancer survivors, Handler built her second company into a success. In 1991, she sold Ruthven Corporation to a division of health and beauty aids giant, Kimberly-Clark. Handler passed away in Los Angeles in 2002, leaving behind her husband of 63 years and millions of grateful little girls and young women around the world.
Limelight America is produced by the LA Radio Network.